papers, of course, this morning full of the story that broke yesterday when Boris Johnson got up in the Houses of Parliament to announce that he wanted to put 1.25% onto national insurance so that basically you will all be paying more tax. What it means for some people, though, of course, because it also goes on to dividends if you run a small company, is you're going to be paying 2.5%, because that's double 1.25 for those of you who are not too bright at the back. 2.5% of a tax rise, supposedly to service the care home sector. We know, and you know, that it ain't going to make any difference at all. And then they're going to tell us that they're going to put it into the NHS as well, and they're going to solve the problem of waiting lists. Well, I don't really think that's going to happen either. Let's talk now to Joe Ventry from the Taxpayers Alliance Digital Campaign Manager. Joe, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. So we're now being taxed more than we were at any time since the Second World War. What a tremendous day to be alive and to be a Tory supporter, right? What's going on?
Oh, indeed. I mean, what a week. I think voters have been waiting with bated breath to find out what the Prime Minister's grand solution for the social care problem was. And, it's been about 2 years since the Prime Minister pledged to sort it out and get a grip around the problem. But I think to say that people will be disappointed now would be an understatement. I mean, instead of coming up with the sort of innovative ideas that we were hoping to see about how we'd really tackle the fundamental problems, after all this time, it would appear that the solution is to simply tap up taxpayers yet again.
Yeah.
And at the worst possible time, and in a way which hits those particularly on low incomes the hardest.
Well, that's right. And I mean, whatever they may say, the money's not ring-fenced. I mean, national insurance money was meant to be ring-fenced in the old days. It was meant to pay for your pension. Everybody knows that's not the case now. But it's a hell of a thing to do, particularly when they said they wouldn't do it. Now, I suppose we're going to get told by everyone from here to kingdom come, we never expected the coronavirus pandemic and now everything's changed. But it hasn't really, because they're still a Conservative government and they're not supposed to be a government of high taxation.
Well, that's it. And, you mentioned ring fencing there, Mike, and it's a very good point, because I think people have been sold this idea that this money is going to go directly into the frontline services that we know need urgent help. But, the Prime Minister went out of his way yesterday to state that this is a hypothesised tax, meaning that, of course, it's ring fenced for this dedicated purpose and they won't be wasted on middle management. But, in real terms, we know that's not the case. I mean, just this morning we've seen this announcement of 42 new managers for the NHS, many of which will be receiving higher salaries than the Prime Minister himself. But, we know that this sort of ring fencing doesn't work in practice. I mean, look at the foreign aid budget, for example. I know you'll know about this, Mike, and most of your listeners will. It's a perfect example. That money is ring fenced, technically, and it produces some of the most infamous examples of wastes that we ever hear about. So I think this bluster that we've heard, I don't think people should be getting their hopes too much that those funds will be directed to those frontline services.
Well, exactly right. And a lot of people yesterday, when the announcement was first made, before the interminably long and boring press conference with all three cabinet ministers, including Boris, Rishi and Sajid Javid, that on your council tax in a lot of places, it already has an amount of money which is given out to social care. So it's not as if we're not paying for it already.
Exactly, and I've seen a lot of people raising that same concern online, Mike. Many local authorities, as you say, add that premium to council tax for social care. And I think this probably shows us what problems we'll see in store for the future of this levy. I mean, instead of being expected to seek savings, councils simply then go on to plead poverty and endlessly ratchet up that precept. So I think this is one of those reasons that we see those rates go up every year. And I think Boris could have learnt some lessons from that phenomenon and try to avoid that sort of failed funding model.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, he's decided to go for the easy route and tap up taxpayers for more money.
Because like with most things with this government, it starts slow, but it sort of builds up. So I'm assuming, Joe, that you guys are getting ready for yet another tax rise come the next sort of budget statement, the next time something, they'll find another way of somehow getting more money out of us.
Well, that's right, Mike. And, we know that this is a big spend government. I mean, we've seen that in the past. I mean, this is probably the most significant act yet. But I think, it's important to remember as a backdrop of all of this, the magnitude of what we're facing here. I mean, we're £2 trillion in debt, over £2 trillion, I should say. We've got the highest tax burden in 70 years. Unemployment is hovering around 5%. And the only way that we're ever going to really recover from this crisis is through growth. And I think the government needs to remember that it has a role to play in that environment and should be helping shape it instead of hiking up taxes relentlessly.
Well, I mean, I was
I
going
was
to
going to
say,
say, these types of hikes are the last thing that we need, Mike.
well, that's right. I mean, most conservative economists and most conservative chancellors would be very, very careful about the purse strings. I mean, they've been profligate about giving money away. I've heard more and more stories over the period of the last few months of people who applied for these bounce-back loans, people who had companies that didn't even form any kind of business anymore, hadn't been companies working for some months, right? But were able to get up to £200,000 worth of money out of the government, free money, which is never going to be returned. Many people who were formerly working in this country and now work overseas, some people who went back to their homelands in Eastern Europe, we're literally talking about millions, probably tens of millions of pounds that's been loaned out and has been taken up by people fraudulently. And in many ways, I don't blame them for doing it, because when governments give away free money, that's what happens.
Well, exactly. And I think, the government had to create a sort of wide net response to this crisis. They had to act quickly. I think people understand that. But at the same time, they will feel ripped off when they see these stories about fraud. Inevitably they will. But, I think it's right that we sort of mention companies in this discussion as well, Mike, and employers. Understandably, most of the conversation is dominated by the impact on employees of this hike in particular.
Yeah.
But the impact that it will have on employers is also massive. I mean, there's a reason that employers' national insurance has been referred to as the job tax. It's because, of course, it will increase the cost of hiring, and particularly at a time when we know that we need employers to bounce back. We need employers to start getting people back into work. And I think the government needs to remember that that's part of the way of growing our way out of this crisis, to get people back into work. And a tax hike like this is only going to disincentivize it.
Yeah. And how is it going to be possible for ordinary individuals who are paying into this system to check what the government's actually doing with this money? I mean, what will be the way of measuring whether they're doing what they say they're doing?
Well, that's it, Maggie. I think it's going to get caught up in a lot of bureaucracy, and inevitably down the line, I think we're going to be asked for more money. I mean, one of the worrying things about this announcement is that it's sort of laid the groundwork, I think, for future tax hikes. I mean, we know that the immediate priority with this levy is dealing with the NHS waiting list, which is undeniably a noble aim and a very big priority. But this revenue will then be transitioned into social care. But as your previous guest alluded to, Mike, can you honestly see a situation where, 2 years down the line, the NHS is willing to renounce this extra money to deal with this crisis? I think, as I said, this announcement is just going to open the door for more tax hikes in the future, and it's set a very dangerous precedent for taxpayers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Joe, thanks very much indeed. Joe Ventry, Digital Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. So when you look at the tax burden that we've had in this country from 1948 to 49, it goes down to 1961, and then takes a massive drop down in the 60s and is very, very low tax indeed, because, of course, you might remember that even back in those days when rock stars were leaving the country because they were being taxed at a high rate of 90% or so, we've never had such a high basic tax. 35% now is what the average tax take is, compared to 37.2% just after the Second World War. And it's never been this high. This is supposed to be a libertarian prime minister. This is supposed to be an organisation called the Conservative Party, which does not believe in high taxation. How did we get here?